I think people are quite politically engaged. And I think you've got two lots. You've got people who are politically engaged, and then you've just got people who are just absolutely fed up and who probably won't vote at all. They're just so fed up with the system because they just go, there's no difference between Labour and Conservative. And I agree with them. And I actually say to them, yeah, you're right, there is no difference. And we've been fed a lie for a long, long time. And but I think people are starting to wake up for that. It's not going to happen during this election, but I certainly think it's going to happen over the next few years. Well, I certainly hope it will do, you know. We've got quite a good campaign going here up in Wavertree, and I've got quite a lot of support from the Muslim community as well. So that's has been, it's actually brought together, I think, our communities. And I don't think that that's going to go away. I don't think that will stop once this election is over, because we had that relationship. Well, we've had it really since October the 7th. And we've really strengthened our ties here. And regardless of what happens next week, I don't think those ties are going to be broken with us, you know. So, and the people I speak to are so disappointed, certainly from the Muslim community, very, very disappointed with Labour, because that was the party that they always thought of as, you know, the good guys. And now they just don't see any difference. Or, you know, certainly Keir Starmer's support and the PLP support, or, you know, no support really for Gaza, but just, you know, throwing all the weight behind Biden and the Israelis. It's just absolutely sickening. But it's more than that. You know, you look at the city here and you just think, is this going to get any better under Labour? And the reality, it isn't. You know, people talk about transforming services, restructuring. What does that mean? It's just another word for cost cutting. And that's, you know, we've been, you know, they can dress it up with as many bows as they want, but it's all about the book. And that's what people are doing. And, you know, I've been a member of the health service for a long time. I've seen more transformational changes, more restructures, you know, than anybody in an awful lot of organisations. And every time they come in, they go, well, we're going to do a new way of doing this. You know, the cynic in me just goes, well, this is all about saving money. And what is happening now is we've got privatisation by stealth. People don't know, it's under the radar. People are not aware about how much, you know, the Labour Party is hand in glove with a lot of these private companies. You know, I mean, I've got a vested interest now of, you know, personal interest of what's going on with the health service because of my own experience. I'll tell you why I don't think it will look after the NHS is I'm a long-standing senior nurse, and I've worked in the hospitals and I've worked in the community. I am a Liverpool girl, so, you know, I grew up in an impoverished area when I was a young kid, and I still see those impoverished areas when I go around the city in my job. You know, as a kid, we used to play out, not on a green field. We used to play out on something which we used to call the debris. And that were the houses that were bombed during the war, and that we would play as young kids out in them. There are still debris around Liverpool. You go around the inner city, you go into some of the areas of Bootle and Sefton, and those areas still exist. And you think, Gordon Bennett, we're sort of 75, 80 years on. Nothing has really changed, and people are still living in poor conditions. But my daughter, my only daughter, my beautiful daughter, back in 2018, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she had 2 small children, and really good job. She was a child protection worker, loved her family, loved her hubby, and she had 5 years of going through treatments with the NHS, which for me, which is what she wanted to do, because it's about her decision, and she did it. But unfortunately, she passed away 22 months ago now. Now, whilst I was, you know, doing as much as I could to support my daughter and my young grandchildren at the time, and my own family and her husband, I was still going to work. And, you know, I work as a community, my job is a community matron in the city. And I go into people's homes, elderly people's homes, go into care homes. And I've got a good relationship with a lot of the staff in the care homes. And the one thing that really strikes you is, and this is a well-known private healthcare company, is I came across two young women who were probably in the same sort of age group as my daughter. Now, my daughter worked for the local authority. So when she was off sick, she got paid. And she was off sick. I mean, to be honest, she was hardly ever off sick. She carried on all the way through her treatments, because we also then had the pandemic and she was doing a lot of work from home that she was able to do with her team. But I was working with two young women, and both of them had been diagnosed with cancer and could not afford to stay off work because all they had was statutory sick pay. This is pivotal, really, of why I'm passionate about what I do. And one of them was actually walking around one day and she had a chemotherapy pump in her uniform that was pumping chemotherapy because she couldn't afford to stay off work and just go on to the statutory sick pay. And for me, I think anybody who is facing a life-threatening condition shouldn't have to be worrying about, hang on a minute, I haven't got enough money to feed my kids or to pay my rent. And I was horrified. And both of these girls had worked for this organisation for 19 years, one of them had worked for. One of them has sadly died now, but that will stay with me, that my daughter, they're both young women, the three of them from this city. And whilst my daughter was getting sick pay from her employer, which was the local authority, if you worked in the healthcare sector, if you work as a nurse, you'll get sick pay. But if you worked in the private sector, where they are making money out of people's misery in some ways, it was just so, there was no equity at all. I just thought it was absolutely disgusting. And I suppose the other thing as well is, all the way through it, I was campaigning and researching a lot into my daughters, and I was just staggered. Not that I was unaware of it, but staggered by the pharmaceutical companies and how much money that they are making. And it really is like a postcode lottery, depending on where you live in the country, whether you'll get treatment, because it'll be down to health boards or, integrated care boards, whether they will let you have that treatment. And now you see GoFundMe, or you see Just Giving, they're all littered with people who are appealing for money for extra treatments. And, I think for any family to be diagnosed, and, it's happened in the royal family, but certainly that they didn't have to wait more than 2 weeks for a diagnosis. They will have been given the best of treatments. Well, I think that should happen all the way across the board. So so when I was asked to stand as a candidate, my before I'd even done that, my campaign that I was really going to go out on was probably about the health service and about the inequity of health and stuff, and poverty is linked to health, as we know. So that's where I sort of got to, really. And now I look at the time that my daughter got diagnosed very quickly, but now, and we're only 6 years on now, people are waiting 4 to 6 weeks for a diagnosis. The 2-week rule seems to have gone out the window. And the 2-week rule was, if you had a high suspect of cancer, you'd get seen immediately by a team of specialists in a hospital that would be able to, sort you out very quickly. And that's gone by the by. So there's all of those things. And, last week I went in to see a friend of mine in hospital. We've got a brand new hospital open in Liverpool with 100 less beds than the one that they knocked down. And he was on what they call corridor care now. It's the same all over the country. So instead of being in a ward or in a room, he was now on a corridor on a trolley. And they've actually made the corridors into little bays for the nurses, which the lights are on all day. People are walking past, and he was a patient on there for 3 days. And it's actually called now, they actually call it corridor care. And I was told, he's in trolley 1 on the corridor care. I didn't call it corridor care. I called it the corridor of shame. And I was pleased to see my colleagues that were there were doing their very best. But at the end of the day, I thought, this is an elderly friend of mine. Is this how we treat our elderly people when they're coming to the end of their life, or, when they're becoming very seriously ill? no, we shouldn't be doing that. So there's huge areas that I've got a sort of personal agenda in now, and that's, if anybody says to me, "Have you got your own agenda?" and I'd say, "Yeah," because I want to see change. But we had a new hospital sort of imposed on us with 100 less beds, and the hospitals before were already under pressure. They were already had ambulances parked outside, and the situation has just got worse. And it's got worse because there's been a deliberate policy of running it into the ground. It's not just a question of throwing more money at it, because the money is going into private health. It's I've seen somebody. I saw something today, and it was somebody was saying to me that they're going. If there'd been a private A&E department for their mother a couple of weeks ago, they would have taken their mother to a private A&E, because they had to wait 12 hours with an 86-year-old woman sitting in a chair all the way through the night till she could be seen the next day. And it's so wrong. So for me, I'm passionate about what I do, and I'm probably waffling a little bit now, but I just think, the rich has got richer in this country and the poor has got poorer. And I came back into politics on the basis of Jeremy Corbyn. I've been a Labour Party member on and off since I was 17, but I was so enthused by Jeremy Corbyn and that wave of that young people, like a lot of people. But let's face it, the reason why Jeremy Corbyn lost the election, because there was a huge campaign never to ever to let him be elected as a PM. And, Starmer, the traitor, was there waiting in the wings, along with the rest of the PLP. So I can't stomach that sort of duplicity from people. I haven't got an agenda. I never expected to be doing this at the age of 66, I can assure you. I thought I'll be retired and I'll be doing something else. And that sort of brings me on to something else in a little bit, because the one thing that I thought was a really good thing was my daughter went to university, and we had to pay for her, but not the extortionate fees that they're paying now. £9,000 a minimum a year, and that's just for your course fees. So we're putting young people into debt to go to university, and then they come out of university and they try and get a job, and they try and get a house. So they go into more debt because they try and get a house, and then basically you'll have to work till you drop, and you'd be lucky to get a pension. And I just think it's just so wrong. I'm not surprised that we see such a rise in mental health and stress with young people, because, a lot of them, it seems to be there's no hope and there's no future. And we've got to have hope. That's the one thing I'm passionate about. We've got to give my children and my grandchildren and my other children, we've got to give them hope for the future. I don't see that with Keir Starmer at all. So I'm in favour of a lot of things that were in the Labour Party manifesto, which have been completely abandoned by them now. But I'm not doing it just for me, because for me, I think we've got a new movement now. In the same way as, the demonstrations that are on every 2 weeks in London over Palestine and Gaza, they're not going away, and they're not getting any smaller. And the people who are going down there, they're going to be, I am convinced they will be part of a bigger movement once I just think a new party will be declared, and it'll be back to basics. It'll be a grassroots movement. And that's the way I sort of see it, really. I've worked in Liverpool, since I was 18, really. And for me, you can go in the area in Wavertree, there's some quite affluent areas, but there's also some very poor areas. And when I was out leafleting the other day, there was a young couple came out and just said to me, I was horrified, really. They said, we can't let our children play out in their backyard. It's just like a small little terraced house, because of the rats in the city, because the rats come into their garden. So as they were talking to me, and they said, we can't let them out on the street to play. And it was a little cul-de-sac, because the rats are here all the time. So there's a massive problem. And I think, for that young couple trying to bring children up, where is their quality of life? Where is their quality of life for their children? Because they haven't got it. And for me, I just think everybody should have that. Those children are entitled to have a happy, healthy environment to be able to go out and play with. I feel as if people talk about, well, we've progressed here and we've progressed there. Not really. I mean, Liverpool City, I love this city. I love the people of this city. They've got a great heart. And we see lots of things going on. We're called, the capital of culture. We're called a music city. And yet there's a lot of income comes in when those things are done, when there's big concerts on. But I'd like to see that money that's made being devolved down to the communities where people live. It's not just about restaurants and hotel chains, and people say, well, it's bringing in jobs for people to work in. Well, it might do if you're happy being on a 0 hours contract and you're happy being on a minimum wage or temporary contracts, because that's what most of them are. And I just feel I want to see a better future for people in this city, so that people can grow up in a healthy and a happy environment, go and have an education, go to university if they want to do, not be bogged down with huge debt. And then when they do get a job, then they've got to pay it all back. Then they go and get a mortgage. They think they're doing okay because they're on the housing ladder. And all that's happened is the banks and the building societies own your houses until the day you finish it off, which is usually, when you come to the end of your career, when you're in your 60s, or, as the Tories or the Labour always have it, you'll be in your 70s, or you'll just work till you drop. How anyone can live just on a state pension is beyond me, to be honest. And yet we see all these, we see gas, we see electricity companies, we see people making massive profits, and yet none of that ever comes back. So I just want to see a fairer society, a much fairer society, where the majority of people get a better cut of the cake. That we're not getting the crumbs off the cake anymore, but we're getting an actual good slice. And that slice, if you talk to most people, and I think we're no different from families in Gaza or anywhere in the world. If people have got families and children, they just want the best for their children. They want them to have a future. They want them to have an education. They want them to be healthy and happy, and be able to enjoy their childhoods. And that, I suppose that's the one thing that drives me and takes me down to London every 2 weeks on a coach for 15 hours, is because I feel every child, whether they're a Palestinian child or a Scouse child or, any child in Britain, they all have that right to have a happy and healthy childhood, So that's where I came into it, So I've been on and off fighting against war all my life. And I just think I don't want my children and my grandchildren to be going into the next 20 or 30 years with the same insecurities that we've got now. There has to be a change, and we've got to give people hope, So that's why I sort of came back into it, really. Reluctantly, I have to tell you, I was a reluctant candidate. But I realised I had a voice in my head, and I hadn't quite turned the clock off yet. I wasn't ready to go round Europe in a little camper van and enjoy my retirement. It's not me, really. I got asked because I'm also the co-chair of Merseyside Pensioners, which we are a very active group. And in Wavertree constituency, they were called the Wavertree Six, and these are the people who, fought very hard for Paula Barker to be elected back in 2017. And what did she do once she was elected? Became part of a group that had these people expelled, and did do nothing when Keir Starmer was attacked. And these were like a lot of the politicians, a lot of the Labour MPs. They were all going to support Keir Starmer. They were all going to do things, but actually, when push came to shove, they did nothing. So there's, people were very unhappy with Paula Barker before I came along, and people were just saying to me, "Will you stand against her? It's not as if you haven't seen what's going on in the city. You've got a good eye for working across." And I've worked all over Liverpool, so I see those inequalities, which is, it's heartbreaking. As a nurse, you're very privileged, really, because you do see aspects of people's lives that other people don't see. And so, you do see, you go into someone's house and you realise they've got no food, um, I know, there's hospitals that have food banks in. What an indictment, for people that we've got a working class, but we've got a working poor now. People who go to, and I've got friends who work in the food banks and they say to me, yeah, we have people coming in their suits at the end of the day, and they come in, they don't want people to see them because they're ashamed that they're having to go for a food bank to feed their family, because there's a choice between paying for your heating and your rent and feeding your kids. So they'll go somewhere where they'll try and get cheap provisions for their kids, which is a food bank. I think it's, we're supposed to be living in a civilized world, and we're one of the richest countries in the world, and yet we treat our own people in a disgraceful way. I never heard of food banks when I was growing up, when I was a kid, but they're all over. And you look at the homeless, you see people in homeless in town, and it's just heartbreaking. Some people don't have those chances in life, but I think that's the job of a politician, is to give them those opportunities and to fight hard for it. I certainly don't see that when I look at, I call them the House of Criminals. I don't call it the House of Commons. It's a House of Criminals, And I mean, the other thing is, I worked all the way through the pandemic, so I saw COVID, like so many people, and you actually saw people dying, and were trying to support families. But then the spectacle of Boris Johnson having 14 or 16 parties in 10 Downing Street, when people couldn't even, go and sit with their own family member who was dying in hospital. And I mean, because we were all fed a lot of disinformation. Not that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I absolutely recognise we had COVID. We had a national crisis on our hands. But, there was one Christmas I didn't go to my daughter's because I was frightened that in my job, I could contract COVID and I could pass it on to my daughter, which would have been like a death sentence for her. But that didn't seem to bother Boris Johnson when he was sending people out with suitcases to go and get booze from the place around the corner. It's more than that. It's about the money that was spent, the millions that were wasted. It's not millions anymore. The Times in New York did an article. There was billions that were made to people in private companies. I think, for me, I think we have to have an independent inquiry, not looking into, why was COVID managed so badly, but we've also got to look into why did so many people make billions and billions on out of date equipment that wasn't fit for purpose. And yet they've, everyone's heard of Michelle Mone, and the car crash interview. Well, there's plenty more in the background. I think David Mellor, who used to be an MP, is one of them, where a lot of these people made a fortune out of other people's misery. And for me, I think if I got elected, well, even if I don't get elected, I think we will take up that campaign, because there's so much going wrong. I mean, I'll give you another little example. We're talking about health and COVID, but there's all this, the new system now is we've got non-doctors. We've got people who are not qualified doctors, and they're now being taken on and called GP. They used to be GP assistants. Now they're called GP associates. We've got anaesthetic associates, which you don't have to be a qualified doctor. You don't have to be a qualified anaesthetist, but you need 2 years training. And it's all brought in by stealth. Now, part of the pensioners, we actually informed our campaigning against this. And there was even doctors, GPs, consultants, didn't know that this was happening on their watch. So now there is a massive thing that people say, well, I can't get an appointment with the GP. Well, the first thing you should be asking is, am I speaking to a qualified GP? because you may not be, you know. I'm sort of rambling here a little bit, sorry, you're going to have to cut, and chop quite a lot. But, you know, it is all of those things. There's so much, I think, that the public are not aware of. And the establishment likes to keep it that way, like the status quo. So the Tories will want to keep it quiet. Labour will keep it quiet. I mean, I'm absolutely delighted Julian Assange has been released. And everyone, what I just said, but it's a bit convenient for Keir Starmer, a so-called human rights lawyer. That's not going to be an issue that he's going to have to be dealing with as a prime minister. So obviously, you know, that was a deal that was done. Hang on, let's put this to one side, because, you know, people will have been saying, hang on a minute, now that you're prime minister, what are you going to do about Julian Assange? You know, it would have been a very awkward, you know, he'd probably had to show his true colours then, you know. So I'm delighted he was out, but, you know, for me, it just shows if you're part of the establishment, you'll continue to be part of the establishment. I mean, I cannot stomach Keir Starmer. I think he's one of the most deceitful people I can think of. I think, you know, how can you have been director of the Crown Prosecution Service during Hillsborough and done nothing? How could you have been, you know, director of the Crown Prosecution Service over John Paul Menendez, the young guy that got shot in London? How can you have been director of the Crown Prosecution Service over the Jimmy Savile and do nothing but throw your hands up and go, well, I wasn't aware of all these things? You take corporate responsibility, and I just think he's part of that establishment there, that he's never, ever going to rock the boat. And we've seen that now. We've seen it over, you know, what the Israeli government is doing in Gaza. You know, he's just waiting for Biden to tell him what to do. He can't make a decision on his own. So for me, he's not to be trusted. The quote is, it wasn't fit for purpose, because when it was checked, they weren't fit for purpose, but they'd already been given millions and millions and millions. And they were just startup companies. They had no experience. It was just another way of making a quick buck out of people's misery. And I think, you know, there's nothing said about that anymore, but it needs to be part of the public agenda, without doubt. And when I say to people, how are you going to vote? And I'll be quite honest and I'll say, I've voted Labour all my life, but never again, because I didn't leave the Labour Party. The Labour Party left me because I had nowhere to go, like a lot of people, because I think they don't stand, their morals and values are not what I see. And actually, when I was out canvassing the other night, there was a young fella I thought he was going to argue with me, to be honest, and he said to me, I just want to say to you, Mrs. he said, I'd argue with you because I do think they've got morals and values. I said, do you? I thought, oh, I'm going to be here for a little argument now. And he said, yeah, except the Labour Party's morals and values are genocide and murder. And that was just somebody saying that to me, and he was perfectly right, you know, perfectly right, you know. So, but I just think now, I mean, one of the guys I was out the other night, and, you know, he just said, I'm not voting. I've never voted all my life, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, he wasn't convinced he was going to vote. So I just said, have you got children or have you got grandchildren? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that's who you need to vote for. Forget about voting for yourself now, but vote for your children and your grandchildren, and vote for a future for them. Because at the moment, they're not going to have a future. You know, we look at our, you know, the sewerage that's being polluted. We look at the environment, what's going on. I mean, we've got a gorgeous beach here in Liverpool. And now people are, you know, you wouldn't let your children go into the water. Honestly, people would be very surprised. We have a sandy beach here. But the amount of pollution and sewage that goes into places is just, you know, it's off the wall, you know, and the water companies are just making an absolute fortune, aren't they? You know, and the people who will have to pay for the repair and all the sewage that's being pumped into the canals and the rivers is the general public, because you'll just get a bigger bill for your water bill, whilst the shareholders' money just goes up. So I just think there's just so much that is wrong. But I just say to people now, look, at the end of the day, I want you to vote for me. One, I haven't got an ego. Two, I don't really want to be doing this at the age of 66. And until somebody else comes forward, well, that is going to be me. I mean, the other candidates that I'm up against, there's a Green Party candidate. And I think one of the differences I had with them is I'm firmly back in favour of, renationalisation of the health service and no more outsourcing to private companies. They should all be taken in hand. A little bit like the council, really. The council should be building houses, and it should have its own workforce to build those houses like they used to have years ago. We should have a proper council house building programme, which is actually supported by a workforce within the council. Why has it always got to be private companies and that are private builders that are doing that? Why is that not part of what a council used to be there to ensure that people had a roof over their heads? So for me, it's almost like we're going back to basics, really. We're going back to the fundamentals, and that is renationalisation of the health service, pharmaceutical companies, and the outsourcing. And as I was saying before, a lot of people don't realise, but a lot of the services now, lots of them have gone out to private companies. Dermatology in Liverpool is run by, you referred to it, a dermatology clinic, which is run by a private healthcare company. So dermatology in the future, there's going to be all, they're waiting in the wings to be to take over those areas where they can see to be making a profit. I just think it's just so wrong. So wrong. I mean, the other thing I'm really passionate about is our care of the elderly. And, I actually think when someone is coming to the end of their life, whether they're ill or whether they're just becoming older, that they should have a dignified and a comfortable living going towards the end of life, not being put into a private care home. And we've seen lots of them. I also know that there's lots of good staff that work in there, but that should be part of our national health and social care. It shouldn't be going out to private companies. You wouldn't do that with children. Excuse me, I thought I'd turn that off. You wouldn't do that with children, yet we'll do it to our elderly. I mean, I can remember a couple of years ago in Liverpool, a care home. They gave 60 days notice to all the residents in there. And these are frail, elderly people. Basically, their families were told, we'll have to find you somewhere else to live because we're closing the care home. And it opened up a couple of years later as a posher version of a care home that has got very expensive fees, so. And some of those elderly patients didn't survive that move to different care homes, so, which is appalling, really. For me, it's a little bit like seeing the refugees on the boats coming over. I couldn't bear to look at and actually, it felt like shock and awe. And when we had, Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were watching those dreadful films that were coming out, the reporters that were doing it, and we were seeing exactly what was done. I just thought, well, what are we doing here? Why are the Israelis attacking and pushing the Palestinians out? The Palestinians, they haven't got an army. They haven't got a navy. They've got no nuclear weapons. The majority that were being killed were women and children. There are probably up to 20,000 children are either missing or being under the rubble. And I just thought, for me, I'm no different to any other mum or nana. Just because I live in Liverpool, I'm no different to somebody who's living in Gaza. And those people had lives. They had schools, they had hospitals, they had universities, they had everything that we've got here. And even though it was occupied by Israel, they still had a life. And for me, I'll go back to my daughter a little bit. My daughter died, and we surrounded her 2 children with love and security to get them through that awful time. But when I looked at what was happening in Gaza, I thought, who's there for those children? Because their parents have been killed, or, their children may have been killed. And there's never been an opportunity. My grandchildren will hopefully go on to have happy and healthy lives. And that's because they were surrounded by love and security. But out there was nothing. And it's almost, people are becoming immune to it. It's almost like saying, well, an Israeli life is, a Palestinian life is worth less than a Liverpudlian life. Well, not in my name, it isn't. Those children out there have got just as much right to a future as the children of this city in Liverpool. So that's why I am passionate about what's happening there, because again, it's so wrong. And people think that even I say this all the time, I've been demonstrating in Liverpool and going on the marches since October the 7th. And we have asked every MP in this city, every MP, to come and speak on the platform. Not one MP has come on the platform. Now, if we had a city or an area that was full of Tory MPs, that's fair enough. But these are Labour MPs and Labour councillors that have not come out. We've got the Independents and we've had the Greens come out. We've had some of the Liberals come out, councillors. We haven't seen one MP, not one MP has come out and supported it. Well, they can all cry now because there's an election, and all of a sudden they're all going, oh yes, we all support a ceasefire now. Well, as soon as the first person was killed, they should have said, we need not just a ceasefire, we need a permanent ceasefire. Not to be started, the permanent ceasefire, not just a temporary ceasefire. But none of them did. And actually, they've all been too afraid to come down to the demonstration, because that's the reality of it. Not one of them have come. So I call that out all the time, and I go, where are they? Where are these people that are meant to represent us? Where are these people who are supposed to be representing, the Palestinian community in Liverpool, the Muslim community? They're nowhere to be seen. Now they'll talk about it. Now they'll say, oh yeah, they were all in favour of a ceasefire. Well, when the SNP put forward that motion, and they were all told by Starmer, do not, don't break the whip. None of them had the courage to do it. Well, they shouldn't be doing the job, because that's a career choice that they made there. And for me, I might be old fashioned, but when you were elected as an MP, or you stood for an MP, you stood because you wanted to represent the area that you were, and you were going to do your very level best for them. But now it's become like a career pathway for people, and I mean, that was another thing I was discussing in the Labour Party. They sent me a thing when I was still in it, and it was, would you like to become a Labour candidate at the next election? We have, they're doing workshops on how to become an MP or how to become a councillor. And I'm thinking, dear God, is that what it's become to? It doesn't really matter what you stand for, what your policies are, but would you like to become a Labour MP? Sign on the dotted line. It's just wrong, So, and I think so many of them get seduced by going down into Parliament that, they don't want to rock the boat. They're on 90 grand plus a year now. Well, I've already said I'll take half of that wage if I'm elected, because there's no way I'm going to be representing an area and lording it over people by, having a much bigger wage packet than the people I'm representing, and I just firmly think that that's what they should be doing. It's, it's not a career pathway. It should have been a privilege to be an MP and represent the people of your area, not a career choice. And I think the mere fact that none of them signed that, supported the early day motion, it just shows you they were more interested in their own careers than they were about dying people in Gaza or Palestine or any child. For me, that wouldn't happen, because I just think I'll throw 30 pieces of silver at every one of them. you know, lives are more important, you know, than that. And so yeah, I'm not happy with the representation from any of the MPs in Merseyside, because not one of them have come down. Would you believe that? Every week we've been marching for 264 days now, or 264 days. Not one of them have decided to come down, and yet they're all asked, you know. So, but they're all asking for votes now because it's a general election next week, you know. So if we make a dint, that'll be good enough for me, you know. Because it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about the start of a movement. It could have been anyone that could have done this. It's just that I was the one that was asked. I suppose because I was probably the most vocal one, and I spoke on quite a number of things. As you can see, I'm jumping from a lot of things because I'm passionate about a lot of things, you know, a lot of things that are just so wrong. When we're all divided, it's easy for people to rule a divided people, isn't it? You know, but I've got more in common with a Yorkshire nurse, a Durham nurse, a Lancashire nurse, you know, who's going out and, you know, working for the family, trying to look for a future, than I have with, you know, some of the big leaders of industry. But I do think, yeah, I think that those things are, I mean, I go to London every week, and actually people say to me when I go down there, they hear the accent and they go, "Have you come all the way down from Liverpool?" As if we've been beamed in from, you know, somewhere. I go, it's only 2.5 hours on the train. But there is that, you can actually sense there is that sort of divide, and, you know, but I just think I've got more in common with working class people in London and in the north and everywhere else, you know, Scotland and Wales. That's what joins us, really, you know. And I think as well is for me, you've still got to give hope to people. And I come back from the marches in London, and I come back completely invigorated to carry on fighting and carry on marching, because it's just good to see people from everywhere. And it was a bit like when Jeremy Corbyn came here, you know, when he was on his campaign trail in 2017 or, you know, whatever, and he was here. You'd never get the sort of crowds for Keir Starmer or Sunak that you had. But, you know, if you've never been to Liverpool, outside Lime Street Station, you couldn't move for the crowds that were there outside St George's Hall, because he was such an inspirational man. But unfortunately, he got stabbed, not in the back, but in the front, by his own party, who were determined never to let him be leader. And also, as well, they've reneged on every promise now that they've ever made. Absolutely reneged on everything. It just shows you how much of a threat he was, you know. Well, one thing about this city, one thing about us, is we've still got that spirit. And it's a bit like Gaza. Sticks and stones will break their bones, but you won't break the spirit. That will continue, you know. And it's the same with us up here. So I'm not expecting any great big shakes next week. Do you know what I mean? You know, not certainly here, but I think what we've got the start of a really good movement in Britain. Well, I'll tell you why they should back for me, because I've got the same aspirations as them. I want to live in a happy and a healthy society. I want to be able to see my children grow up without the fear of war hanging over their shoulders, without the fear of all of the debt of going to school, going to university, getting a job, having to pay it all back, getting a house. You want to make the life for your children that much easier. And you want to make your own life easier in this city. We want to go back and have proper services in the city. We want a proper health service. We want to be able to see a doctor when you need to see a GP, not to be told after, 200 rings, there's no appointments left today, when you've been ringing at 8 o'clock. I've got the same needs as the people I'm going to represent. And that's the difference. I'm no different from them. If that makes sense. I am no different than the people I want to represent. And I know that I'll not be seduced by by the halls of power in London, in the House of Commons. I'm just not. I'll keep, in the same way I was fighting to keep my daughter alive, I'll be fighting for the constituents of Wavertree to do exactly the same. I'll do that for them, because we have to have ordinary people representing us, and I am just an ordinary worker. And for too long, I think we've been kidded that it's only a certain way that in this country that we're going to get any change. And I think as well, the other thing is I offer some hope for people. I mean, I think Keir Starmer says he offers change. Well, there was one word he should have put in front of that, which was no change. Because it's tired, same old policies. I want to see a proper bright future for people in this city, and especially for our kids and our grandkids. I don't think, oh God, I'm going to be Anne Sand, the great MP. I just don't do that. You're there to represent people. That itself, it should be a privilege enough. I feel I've been a nurse for a long time, and I always go, people say, what's good about it? And I go, do you know what? It's a privilege to be able to look after people. And it should be a privilege to represent the people that you in the areas that you work and you live in.